Hello everyone, can you hear me? Okay, so let's get this going. So I'm just busy setting up the stream at the moment. I'm looking for a link that everybody can use to join. So I'll probably edit this part out because it's just me like doing random facial expressions on the screen. So let's share this also to Raising Vibrations community. Raising Vibrations, yep. Okay, amazing. I love doing these live streams, by the way. It gives me an awesome opportunity to connect to all of you guys. So if you are participating and you have the opportunity to speak in the chat, please let me know. Okay, let's do this. Come on. Okay, chats. How do I speak in the chat? There we go. There we go. Okay, so we've got 2 people watching already at this point in time. So today's discussion that I wanted to have with everybody was actually regarding Saturn, and I've been recently working with Saturn actually in my astrology work more than I've been before, not only because I felt that this was something that I think we all need to acknowledge in our astrology like discovery and also our observations within our actual birth chart itself. And I've noticed that there's some good information out there regarding Saturn and how you can work with the energy itself. But I've also noticed that there's some information on Saturn over there that really doesn't give us a whole lot to work with. Okay, so I can see some people have joined us already, which is amazing. So what I wanted to do was maybe just open up a little bit with talking about what I felt was lacking with the energy of Saturn in my research. And because I have lots of Virgo in my chart, I find myself being very picky about and noticing that there could be improvements or better ways to express stuff or healthier ways or more improved things. So I do apologize in advance to anybody for maybe my over zealous approach towards improving things when, they don't need to be that, that extreme, I suppose. Maybe Pluto and Libra generation as well. But anyway, so what I found was that there's not a lot on Saturn regarding the shadow. Okay, so open up a little bit with Saturn and the shadow. And for most of us, when we grow up, I mean, I can't really say for everybody that's out there that how your life was growing up. But for those of you that have had experiences growing up where your parental figures, parental dynamics, mother and father, grandfather, society, maybe even local community, was in some way, shape, or form maybe not extremely supportive of the way that you would operate, how you would naturally be as a person. And what would naturally occur here is that we would develop a very unhealthy relationship towards authority figures or people that have developed growth in their life that now have a sense of influence in the world. I know for a fact that if we had to look at this from a more Sagittarian perspective, in other words, if we had to look at it from the point of view of a larger scale, to kind of open it up here a little bit. If we look at governmental structures themselves, they represent to us a sense of authority that we are in some way, shape, or form having to respond to, and they do influence our lives immensely because of the laws and regulations and rules that we have to, as a community or world, abide by to a certain degree. Otherwise, there are some severe consequences that we have to deal with. So what I'm saying is that our relationship towards the authority in itself gets heavily influenced by our early life conditioning and imprinting. And because, of course, we are naturally souls, as we're growing up in our lives, sponges to the energy and the environment around us, we can be incredibly influenced by things that have distortion, which has a very deep effect upon our psyche, upon the way that we look at reality when we get older. And the shadow part of Saturn, I think, should be really, really looked at in our birth charts and analyzed, and to a certain degree even spent, however long it takes, time to ask yourself, are these healthy responses to boundaries that have been put in place? And how do I respond to situations that I might not feel like I have power towards? And this can be it can be a variety of situations, So for instance, somebody that might have Saturn in Aries or Saturn in the first house and gets raised in a family where there's, a lot of physical abuse. And then you have another soul that, say, for instance, has Saturn in ninth house Pisces, as an example. Okay. And so what we deal with here is this issue where we then have situations and circumstances that will trigger off those wounds or unresolved kind of, or disintegrated or imbalanced, or, like I said, unresolved relationship towards authority and putting boundaries in place and other people's boundaries. So with somebody that had with person A that had Saturn in Aries in the first house, can actually respond to a situation when triggered by overpowering the situation and being very forceful and violent and being kind of non-aware of and maybe another person's space. And the amount of negative feedback that could possibly occur when somebody's interacting with this type of experience can be traumatizing, because they might not know that really they're acting from their own inability to know how to put boundaries in place and act from a place that's maybe more healthily integrated. So what I would consider to be more healthily integrated Saturn in the first house boundary would be to know how to defend yourself without getting aggressive. Whereas, say, somebody has ninth house Sagittarius with a Pisces, it's in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces or Saturn in 12th house, their relationship to the boundaries can be formed in an early life environment where maybe the parents didn't know how to be responsible with things, and showed the child that they had no power in life, or showed you as person B in life that there was no power. And so you get up into life and something triggers you off where you're standing in a queue and somebody jumps in front of you, and your instant response to the situation is to say, that's just how life is. I can't really have any power of the situation. I can't influence it. I just have to let that go. And we can rationalize or convince ourselves, and especially in that particular instance, that it's okay, but really on a deep level, it's our psyche responding to an unhealthy or underdeveloped Saturn energy in us that is causing us pain, emotional pain. And if we looked at the shadow of Saturn, however it manifests, and I think that, of course, in order for you to actually develop a deeper relationship towards the Saturn in your chart and maybe even the shadow part of it, I don't know if there is information out there that can help with that story. I think you have to spend some time in contemplation or reflection regarding the nature of how you impose your own authority in your environment, and how does that like influence us in that way. So it's definitely something to look at, and like I said, I'm encouraging you to do that. I would look at an astrologer that maybe can help with that type of thing. And I think that if you had to embrace that part of your Saturn energy that maybe was underdeveloped when you were a younger kid and your environment kind of didn't give you that opportunity to develop that sense of structure, then it's important to be able to heal that. And this is why, because if you are somebody that seeks to want to establish a structure in your life that can support your dreams, then your response to reality and the control that you can exercise over your reality does determine a lot based on how much your Saturn is integrated into your birth chart. And the reason why that's the case is because Saturn in itself is the structure. It is the way that you define yourself. Again, it is your compass, as it were. And your dreams cannot be contained in a boat or a definition or a container that is flimsy, that doesn't have a deeper reach, or that in any way whatsoever is strong. It's not structured. So it's great that we can look at life and feel our dreams and aspirations within our minds and in our hearts, and yet lack the capacity to actually develop them in the physical world or anchor them into the physical world, because our relationship is consistently being sabotaged by the Saturn in our charts that is underdeveloped and unmatured, the shadow. Okay, so where is it that the relationship to our sense of boundaries and definitions and authority with regards to ourselves is wounded? And I know that, you know, for me personally, the reason why I'm actually talking about this as well is because it's something I have to consistently deal with on a day-to-day basis, because of my own soul's trauma regarding this situation. And I speak from direct experience. And I think that one of the reasons why this YouTube channel itself exists is because it's a way to heal that unresolved kind of shadow that lurks in my psyche regarding the Saturn energy. So words of encouragement regarding how to actually present yourself and anchor yourself into the world that is Earth, and to ground yourself. Your Saturn provides you with a great deal of context of how you go about doing that. Now, in evolutionary astrology, there is a specific understanding regarding the relationship between Saturn and the moon. And I think that if you are somebody that is looking to deepen your relationship to yourself, and of course using astrology as a tool to objectify that inner reality, you do have to, in some way, shape or form, look at the relationship that Saturn has to the moon in your birth chart. Okay, so here's why. The moon itself will represent the ego structure that you use in a conscious way. Okay, so raising vibrations, as an example, is the ego structure that I use to facilitate my soul's healing path. Okay, and the way that I consciously identify myself with that reality is through that ego structure. Now, it's also how I nurture myself. It's also how I create emotional security on a moment-to-moment basis. So if you had to identify the moon in your birth chart through the lens of, this is my identity, this is how I nurture myself, this is how I protect myself, then that is how you see yourself inwardly. That is your encompassing identity structure. Then Saturn would represent the way that gets defined in the outer world. So how do you channel that identity into the outer world? How does that outside identity get manifested? So for me, it's through, like I said, creating an identity called raising vibrations. And then the shell that I use to activate the dream through is the discipline, It is the desire to want to know more. It's the setting up a live stream as an example. This is the kind of modality. This is the way it moves itself through. And that's how it gets defined outwardly in astrology. I work with astrology as an example. It's about healing as an example. So you get this kind of relationship between the two. So in your birth chart, if you have, say, for instance, the moon squaring Saturn, then you're going to have some difficulty regarding actualizing your sense of identity in relationship to your authority, because there's some tension there. Okay. If you have the moon oppose Saturn, there's going to be maybe a deep feeling with inside of yourself that the restrictions and rules or outside definitions are imposed on you, and that your sense of emotional validation and experience and integration of your identity cannot be actualized. So this is, again, this is a big deal for us in the sense that if we are honestly looking at healing ourselves within our astrology chart, the moon itself will give you a identification of yourself. The Saturn will give you an identification of how that gets defined in the outside world, how you go about actually creating that boundary or barrier. And then the phasal relationship, and this is what I wanted to say, the phasal relationship between the two will tell you how easy that is, or how difficult or how challenging that might be. Okay. Say, for instance, you are a soul that has a new phase conjunction between Saturn and the moon. Now, of course, you guys probably don't know about new phase conjunctions and squares, like a crisis and action squares and stuff. And if you are interested in actually wanting to know more about that stuff, you can always contact me and have like a private tutoring session on that type of stuff, or explore your chart if you want, or study astrology with myself. But the phasal relationship in itself dictates immense amount of ways in which that's gonna how that's gonna relate to you. So if your Saturn and the moon is conjunct each other, and say, for instance, if you had to look at Saturn as a fixed point and you had to look at the moon's relationship to Saturn, if, say, for instance, Saturn was at 1 degree Scorpio and the moon's at 3 degrees Scorpio or 5 degrees Scorpio, that's a new phase conjunction. Okay. That will imply in this lifetime, you're actually trying to create a new self-identity. And so you probably will come into this lifetime going, I don't know how to put myself out there in the world. Now imagine the types of psychological impacting and trauma that you might occur or put into yourself when people turn around and go, you're failing at life, you're not good at it. Whereas deep down inside, you're going, I don't even know how to do this because it's the first cycle I've done. It's like I'm free, I'm supposed to explore. How many of us self-validate the fact that the way that we are naturally within our consciousness is exploring our natural paths? And how do we find that sense of natural path if we're not honestly looking at the way that the cycles are operating in our birth chart through this lens? And so that's what I meant earlier in when I said that there's not a lot of information out there that can accurately give us a sense of depth that we should be having when we're wanting to look at our soul. It's great that we can understand our personality types, and there's immense amount of that out there, but it's now time to confront those limitations as a human race, as a collective consciousness, as a individual souls that are on a path to empowerment regarding their own personal journey of soul awakening, however you wish to define it. So we have to confront those limitations, and we have to be ambassadors for change by asking those questions and saying, this is not providing me with the depth that I seek. How can I explore more? What can I do more? And so on and so forth. So just a kind of Saturn little nudge in the corner over there, just giving us the sense of we should not accept the standards at this point in time, that we should up them. And it's not acceptable to just take astrology as face value and allow it to be, sort of just pushed aside as some pseudoscience that doesn't actually have a very strong, authentic voice that is promoting it. And I suppose I'm on my soapbox at the moment in time, feeling the need to do that. But you understand the point that I'm truly trying to make here. So the chat box is pretty good at the moment in time, and just going to say hi, everyone. It's super cool to participate in this experience. I really hope that you guys get a lot out of this as well. So Saturn and its phasal relationships. Now, there was two souls that were talking about. I think it was so Saturn's in the first house, first house ascendant in Scorpio, and Moon in the eighth house, Gemini. So already, I mean, from a Moon in the eighth house Gemini perspective, your self-identity really wants to confront the limitations. And you want to get to the bottom of everything. And then it's in Gemini, so you're really trying to get to the bottom of the nature of facts, opinions, thoughts, ideas, how you communicate, what questions do you want to really, really ask. And the Moon in 8th house, Gemini, can you see the repeating theme? The Moon's in the 8th house, so it's a Scorpio house, right? So you're wanting to be you wanted to ask the questions that matter. And then you've got Saturn in the first house, and it's like, in Scorpio, and it's like the nature of your boundaries are already coming to this lifetime where you want to confront the limitations. So your natural response to reality is to want to confront the limitations and ask ourselves, where are we disempowered in every moment, or how can we empower ourselves in all moments? And then what type of language do I use to empower myself? How can I attach my sense of identity to it? So I think that was Femila Blue for Fema Blue, the Saturn in the first house. Can everybody see how that manifests there? And Moon in the 12th house, semi-square, my Saturn retrograde in Gemini in the first. This explains why I've spent, precisely, finding my voice. That's right. Yeah. And probably coming into this lifetime where you've had to probably surrender a lot of your sense of self-identity to situations outside your control. And then the Saturn retrograde in Gemini is saying, it's now time for me to individuate what I think is true and find my voice. Yeah, literally. And I wouldn't be surprised if you've actually had situations where your voice is being suppressed by authorities in some way, shape, or form. Because your Saturn's retrograde, I would also actually look at your Uranus in your chart to give you more indication of how that suppression has occurred and how you can actually individuate that Saturn retrograde, because Saturn in itself, when it's retrograde, Uranus will always give you the answers to how to fix, or not fix, but validate the Saturn, if that makes any sense. And that goes for everybody, by the way. If you have Saturn retrograde, always look to Uranus in the birth chart to tell you how to individuate that process, because there's kind of like a gateway from Saturn to Uranus when Saturn's retrograde, because it's obviously inward. So it's like, I need to throw off the definitions. And I wouldn't be surprised if you probably challenged your parents at some point as well. If I pronounce that correctly, a faint 72 with regards to that, and you were told that you weren't allowed to speak, or maybe you did have a strong voice, but maybe you were criticized. I don't know. So again, working with Saturn, for me, it's been actually pretty fascinating to work with Saturn in my own personal charts. I mean, Saturn actually rules the 12th house, and it's also conjunct my Sun in the 10th house as well. And what's really interesting about that is that when you look at the symbolism over there, Saturn in 10th house, the soul wanting to metamorphose its personal identity and its sense of identity in the outside world. And yet, one of the things that my Saturn shadow carries with it is the trauma regarding a parental structure that never actually gave me strong boundaries. And so now all of a sudden I find myself in situations in where I can't essentially, or I can, it's not as strong as I'd like it to be, but of course that's the point, that's where my growth is happening in this stage. But I can't, or I struggle to validate those personal choices for myself, because on some deep level I feel like there's going to be an abandonment that will occur. And it's really, really interesting how I'm learning how to integrate the Saturn shadow into my consciousness and use it as a tool to validate my my personal sense of authority for my life. In fact, I'm actually writing a letter at this point in time to one of my parents, explaining to them how it wasn't okay to basically be a facilitator for the trauma that is associated with the Saturn shadow. So yeah. Okay, so Uranus opposition with Saturn. Any thoughts? So that's a celestial family or celestial infinity. It's a very big subject to cover. So I'm going to try to be very simple in my expressions, but yet still have impact in what it is that I have to say. If I understand what you're saying correctly, Uranus opposition with my Saturn. So, with Uranus oppositions, there's 3 stages that you have to be very conscious of. Firstly, a Uranus opposition as an archetypal structure is to bring the soul out of the pre-existing structure that it has been living in. So, in other words, you up until this point in time, you have defined yourself a certain way, Saturn. Then Uranus comes along and it hits this point in the Uranus opposition and says, okay, right. So Uranus opposition to Saturn, yeah, because Uranus will oppose Saturn, exactly. So this is the point. The point is that when you have a Uranus opposition in your life, you will naturally also have Saturn oppose its natal Saturn as well. And the key here is to recognize it's about individuation. So you're breaking away from a shell that the soul used prior to this life, and you are looking to create a new identity structure that then will be reflected in society. So it's almost as if it's a point where you're starting to blossom. But you have to, the crisis comes in the situation where your relationship towards authority, your boundaries, your definitions, the words you use to define your life, etc., those things will naturally crumble. Those things will naturally be challenged. Those things will naturally need to be confronted, because the limitations in that Saturn cycle or that Saturn energy will literally cause the frustration that will then ask Uranus to go, I need to awaken you here. Okay? So it's a very important period of time to acknowledge the trauma and Saturn shadow work that of course we carry with us. And I feel that anybody like John, for that matter, you were talking about how do you feel about Saturn in Sag? I'm going through my first return in the 2nd house. Some would say that Saturn doesn't like being in Sag because it's so expansive. Thank you. And it's the truth. Your first Saturn return is about spending the next 8 years really dealing with the Saturn in your life, the shadow. And I think that if you do the work regarding your Saturn, between the ages of 29 and 38, your Uranus opposition becomes an incredibly powerful experience where you actually take the structures of your existence and you destroy them, but you take the wisdom with you. So it's like, I've got this box, I'm going to break the box down, but all the stuff that I gained in terms of information and knowledge, I'm going to keep with me, and then I'm just going to amplify that in the world. So Carl Jung, for instance, would be a great example of how that plays out, because he wrote about individuality and the individuation process in his Uranus opposition, and look at how much of his work has actually stayed within the collective consciousness, past his physical ending or physical passing. So it's essential that you recognize that Uranus opposition is a point of individuation, but Saturn work, in my opinion, has to be integrated in during those years. Now, of course, if you're hearing this for the first time and you're going through Uranus opposition, this doesn't mean that you now have to go and say you failed. It just means that the work that you'll naturally have to go through, in my opinion, might be a little bit more difficult, only because the layers that you might have to peel away in order to find individuality will take a little bit longer. That's all. That's my opinion of the situation. Again, at the end of the day, you're still going to go through the experience, okay? So some would say that Saturn doesn't like being in Sag because it's so expansive. Well, think about it this way. Like my opinion on Saturn and Sag is a very different one to the generic ways that they speak about it. Yes, Sagittarius, but no, I would say that the one size does not fit all. So, if you have Saturn and Sag in the second house, but you say, for instance, have like Mars trining the Saturn, as an example, and say, for instance, you've got some other positive aspects to that, and you grew up in a family where you had strong, Saturn boundaries and stuff, then all it will be is that you will actually take your dreams and your feelings of expansion and validate them in the world and actually bring out some really, really cool, innovative ideas regarding how you wish to define your life. So, you know, it's really, really circumstantial. And I think that the first Saturn return for you is about coming home and putting an anchor into the physical world and saying, where are my personal limitations, and how do I use my personal limitations as an anchor to project me into the direction I seek to facilitate my dreams. Like, what are my dreams? I think that's an important question that you should ask yourself at your Saturn return is, what are my dreams, and how does my current state of egocentric structure slash definitions framework help me facilitate that? And if I feel that they're not providing that context for me, then I need to find new ways of bringing that into the world. And I think that this is a time in our lives where we can actually start to actualize our dreams instead of having to be in survival consciousness. So, yeah, I think Saturn in Sag is an amazing experience for you to choose exploration. Saturn conjunct Jupiter, which I have at this point in time, does suck because Jupiter wants to expand and Saturn wants to confine stuff. But if you can be creative enough to use the limitations that Saturn imposes upon your belief systems, then you can actually find yourself channeling some really, really profound, strong, structured manifestations, because Saturn's saying, okay, look, here's where you can become more grounded in your philosophical approach. Here's where you can be more creative with the limited experience, but how can you be more specific with your thing? How can you be more practical, as an example? Okay. So Saturn shadow is something that I feel is really, really important for us to look at this stage and to pay attention to. Saturn conjunct Jupiter, again, natally in the person's charts, as I said, will give this need for a deep importance regarding what belief systems do I use and how do those belief systems facilitate my ongoing evolution, and in particular, what type of boundaries do I put around my belief systems that facilitates that evolution. So the question you should be asking yourself with that conjunction is, what do I believe and how does it fit into a container that gets me from point A to point B? Okay. I have Sag ascendant and Saturn is currently conjunct it, and I feel myself having more conservative worldviews, which feels weird to my otherwise open-mindedness. So let's have a look. Saturn, you have Sag ascendant, and Saturn is currently conjunct it. Okay, I would also look at what the nature of Jupiter is doing at your chart at this stage, because Jupiter could be having some sort of transits or having angles made to it at this stage. So look where your Saturn, where your Jupiter is in your chart as well, because Jupiter rules your ascendant, or Sagittarius is that. I would also say that the conservative worldviews are probably a manifestation, in my opinion, of something more along the lines of practical perspectives that are actually able to facilitate something that you wish to be more grounded upon. So an example that I could give you in terms of what I intuitively feel from that question is, like, for me, for instance, I've when I first started my YouTube channel and worked a lot with the way I wanted to express myself, I did have a very creative right brain approach to things, and I was very intuitive in my expressions, but felt that over the time, and especially over the last year, or should I say at least 6 months, I've become more influenced by the need for practical embodiment of the energies that are currently happening at this stage. So how do I make astrology more practical for us to use and for it to actually have an effect on our lives versus something that's more abstract and just exists within our etherical creative sides that we use to entertain us? Okay. Yeah. So precisely, maturing, growing up, exactly, wanting to recognize my limitations and to also my time. I think that's what you're probably reflecting upon deeply as well, is the nature of time, and being conservative of what choices you make, because your time is important to you, you know? Okay. Okay, so Leary is asking, what about Saturn in the 12th house in Leo, and with the Leo ascendant and Sun in Scorpio? Okay, so the first thing to know is the relationship between Saturn and, pardon me, Scorpio and Leo in the astrology chart is one of creative self-actualization. So in order for you to become creatively validated, in order for you to find yourself in the world, you need to commit to something. So for me, for instance, if I'm going to creatively self-actualize myself, like follow my special destiny, Leo, I need to commit to something. And so I've committed to this. I've committed to evolutionary astrology as a way, a vehicle of expressing myself through that lens. So the fact that you have 12th house Saturn Leo shows me that there's some past life dynamics regarding actually having to surrender a lot of your own personal boundaries towards people that have had more creative gifts than you have, and that has probably made you feel a little bit more detached from life, not maybe feeling a sense of hope that you could feel validated in your life. Your dreams that you wish to bring into this world can be not seen in some way, shape, or form. And of course, the Sun in Scorpio is asking you to evolve through confronting those things and bringing your ego into an alignment where your dreams, your feelings of special destiny, and your sense of personal authority are aligned like this. And that's really, really key. You are looking to become your own father in this lifetime. So I would definitely look at the father archetype in your life and observe how that has influenced you, and how have you been shown how to look after yourself in this life, okay? So I'm just going to quickly click the Facebook over there. So guys, I think that I'm probably going to chat for about like 5 minutes, and then I'm going to end this because I've been working for some time now, and I do want to go eat some food. But yeah, Saturn's retrograde as well. So look to Uranus in your chart to show you how to individuate that process, okay? Okay, so you're asking a question about what is the significance between Saturn and Uranus in retrograde. Okay, if I understand that correctly, if Saturn's retrograde, and then why I look at Uranus. So Saturn correlates to the structure and overall boundaries, okay, in consciousness. Uranus sits outside that boundary, and Uranus fractures it like this. It hits it like this, and it's almost as if, like, if you had to take a spinning disc, and you had to take that's metal, and you had to take another piece of metal and touch that disc that's spinning like incredibly fast, you'd watch sparks fly. So that's the interface between Saturn and Uranus, okay? It's the relationship between something that wants to touch a physical boundary and break it so that we can perceive things in a new way. So that's why Uranus correlates to the awakening, because you are taking a paradigm and you're reframing it so that you can experience it in a new way. So if Saturn's retrograde in the birth chart, it implies that the doorway towards the Saturn in your consciousness is inverted. And so therefore you are looking to individuate the experience. Okay, you're looking to find your own personal definitions, laws, regulations, ethics, moral judgments, etc. And because it's an individuating process, Uranus in the birth chart will show you specifically how you need to do it. It's a gateway that shows you And it's the same with all planets for that matter. If Uranus is retrograde in your chart, you look to Neptune as a way of healing the sense of identity structure. I mean, that's another discussion that we can have. So that's why that's the case, okay? And of course, if Uranus is trining that, it means that that's a good thing. That's a healthy way of your soul. That's where it is at this point in time. So any thoughts on Saturn in aspect to the nodes? Yes, that's really, really key. If you've got Saturn squaring your nodal axis, whether it's a conjunct, if it's squaring it. Okay. So you see there with Leary, you're talking about Saturn square, where Saturn's retrograde and then it's squaring Uranus. And there we go again. There's that tension aspect regarding breaking those definitions and saying, okay, I'm done with the old way of defining myself. I've got to be new. I've got to be different. I've got to express myself in new ways. And I've not got to listen to people that give me ideas about how I should be. If Saturn's connecting to the nodal axis itself, it's really, really important to recognize that you're struggling a little bit with the relationship between how to bring my authority into the world going forward and how to resolve the unresolved stuff that is from the past. Okay. If your Saturn's conjunct the nodal axis, either it be the north node or the south node, then if Saturn's conjunct south node, you come into this lifetime with deep, heavy sort of like karmic dynamics that need to be resolved, but you're also very, very good at taking responsibility for stuff. If it's conjunct north node, like in my parents' case, my mother's case, it's needing to actually take responsibility for your life and to not think that everything is just about, just handouts, as it were. So yeah. Okay. My moon sign, I have moon in the 5th house. So I have moon in Leo and I have moon also in Gemini. So those are my 2 signs, and hence the reason why I'm communicating to you guys on YouTube. And it's conjunct my north node as well. So it's something that I have to do. Okay, guys, thanks so much for giving me this opportunity to share this stuff with you today. I really hope that you learned something from this experience. Next week, I'm trying to make this a standard thing where every single Friday we have a live stream. So if you feel that you have space to create, sometimes not sometimes, but on Fridays, I'll be able to hold this space for you, okay? And to really connect with you guys. Other than that, I've got some really, really cool stuff up my sleeve that I'm busy working with at this point in time. And once I have really got it to a point where I feel that it can be released to you guys, I will do that. But until then, have a fantastic weekend, okay? Take care. Bye.